Cara, welcome to the Way of Champions. So excited to have you on.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here with you. Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity and excited to see what we dive into today.
Yeah, well, you and I are just chatting away for 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, at some point I got to hit record here. So I think we have a ton of topics to talk about and get through. We've had some people in the rowing world on before. I remember Catherine Granger a couple of years ago, who was a multiple time Olympic and world champion, and just gave me such insight into the sport. And you're a world champion rower, and now retired and helping other athletes and everything. But let's kind of talk about your career. And you have a great blog that you started in 2015 called Be Brave. Why'd you call it Be Brave?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's so funny. And that should be a softball question, right? And it actually I've been asked this many times and I wish I had this like very compelling answer. And I can't quite remember why I ended up naming it that, to be honest. I will say that since then, it's become a little bit of a mantra for me. And I will find myself like when I'm feeling a little bit of fear and need that little extra courage, with even like the simplest things, I'll find myself repeating it in my head, like be brave, take the step, take the leap, whatever it is that you need. So yeah, yeah.
But I think it's such a great mantra. I had a guy 2 years ago, Drew Broughton, who's a former professional soccer player, and he works with a lot of athletes, and his thing is sweat and courage. Like that's it. That's the secret, right? And I think we live in this world where everyone's selling the shortcut to athletics, the shortcut to success in business, and yet in 450 episodes talking to Olympic champions, World Cup champions, top coaches, no one has said there's a shortcut. Everyone's a 20-year overnight success, right? And that was kind of your rowing career as well, and just a lot of cold mornings and um, cold water and rain and whatever, single-mindedly, pursuing something that it's not a straight path, is it? So bravery is really the key.
Yeah, bravery, right? Commitment, courage. Yeah, no shortcuts, 100%. I agree with you. And then what also came up for me as you were talking about that was also no secrets, right? I think there's a lot of athletes, I don't know if this applies to coaches too, but they're looking for like that one secret thing, right? It is just a lot of like hard work, consistency, smart decision making, right? Good decision making, having that internal circle of trust, the people you can count on, and just like putting the work in over time. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean there is nothing that gets you there. You got to row a certain amount of miles to have the base to be there. I'm always, as soon as someone says I have the shortcut or I have the hack, it's sort of like I just kind of move on through because I just have found that there isn't that. And so let's talk about your career for a while. When was it when sort of you said like, yeah, rowing's my thing? Because it's not necessarily a sport of first introduction. Did you have rowing in your family? Do you have friends? How'd you get into it?
Yeah, no rowing in my family. So I was actually a swimmer growing up. I swam throughout high school. Rowing was not a sport that I even knew about until I want to say junior or senior year of high school. One of the women I swam with, she was a year ahead of me. She went to college at University of Miami, and I remember her coming home for winter break and telling me like, "Hey, I joined the crew team." That was literally like the first time I had ever heard about it, right? I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and rowing has since like exploded, and while it's not wildly or widely accessible, it is more so than when I was growing up. So that was like my first introduction to it, and I think a curiosity in combination with I felt pretty ready to move on from swimming. That was that became a grind in high school, not in a positive way, right? a grind in the sense that like you're just doing the work day in and day out, trying to shave those like tenths of a second off your time.
And had you started
So
swimming really young? Like you were kind of a swimmer all the way through?
fourth grade.
Fourth grade, yeah. So a lot of, I
Mhm.
mean, I meet a lot of swimmers who are just, they get to that point in high school and they're like, I am done with 5 a.m. at the pool.
Yeah, I think I think for me, and this was a shift I had to make later on. Like, I saw myself as like a trainer, right? And I think this still is maybe what I would call a myth persists, where you're either like a trainer or a racer. Like, I don't think I ever necessarily fell out of love with like the practice, but I just felt like I was hitting wall after wall. Like, so I was putting in the time, doing the work, showing up, enjoying training. Like, till this day, I still love training.
Mhm.
But I wasn't seeing the results that I wanted. And at a point, you just get like fatigued doing
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, a combination of things led me to end up rowing. And Lehigh's. So I went to Lehigh University, Pennsylvania. Um, and then I walked on the team freshman year. It was actually a club program at the time.
Mhm.
We did transition to varsity in between, I want to say, my junior and senior year. That was more of just something that happened on paper versus like really impacted my personal experience.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was kind of how it started.
Mhm. And so when you were done with college, you were like, but I'm not done with rowing yet. Like how close were you at that point to making a national team, to going to a world championships or an Olympics or anything like that?
Not close at all.
Okay.
Not at all. And quite frankly, let's see, where can I go with this, or where should I start with this? I had I had this idea that it was a possibility. I also had this. I I did have the desire, like I had the desire in my heart, right? And that goes back to when I was a kid. I remember Amy Van Dyken, like watching her in the Olympics in the 1996 Olympics, and something was just like drawing me to that. I always and still do to some extent to this day, like seeing that podium moment where like you see the athletes and their teammates with the flag, with the national anthem going, like that always just like stirred something in me.
Hmm.
So the idea was there. Now I had no idea what the path was. And I didn't make a clear decision after college, like this is what I wanted to do. I actually felt this very intense responsibility to get a job, make money. My parents put me through college. So I moved to Philadelphia simply because I had a job opportunity in the suburbs and it enabled me to row. And then I just kind of like put the pieces in place and learned the process along the way.
Hmm.
Now, that's not the only reason. So I think it's relevant and important to share. I made my first national team when I was 34 years old.
Yeah.
That is how long the path was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think part of it was just because I needed to develop still like the strength, the skills to get there. That's 100% part of it. Before we started recording, we briefly touched on, I went through a few injury rehab cycles. But in addition to that, I really just had no idea of like what it took to get there in
Yeah.
terms of like the path forward, and then also in terms of what it was going to take from me physically.
And I mean, one of the great decisions you make to go to, is it Boathouse Row in Philly there? Yeah. Like you all of a sudden put some of the best people in the world in your windshield. Like, okay, that's where I have to get to, and here I am now. Like it's hard to be on an island thinking I'm good but not sure, versus you get in the water and you see someone who is on the national team, who is an Olympian, and go, "Oh, okay, that's where I'm going." And to have someone to chase is really important, but also to know, hey, I'm in the same boathouse, or I'm on the same river doing the work as this person's doing it. So at least now I know I'm on the path.
Yes, and also I think what's related, I had to see, and this was like I think a perspective shift for me, that the people who were at the top, and so for me at the time, like at the top, like everybody was better, like literally everybody. Um, So at the top didn't even necessarily have to be at the Olympics or at the world championship level. At the top could mean at the top domestically, right? But be able to see and make the connect the dots and see that like, oh, these athletes that are performing at that level right now, they are just like me. And just like we were talking before, they're just human beings showing up on time, doing the work, you know,
Getting
and
injured,
then
overcoming
yeah,
injuries, like they're not like superheroes.
they're not, and I very much had this idea in my head, you know. So that was a massive shift, and I think that's a really important message, you know, to get out there and just to convey over and over again.
Yeah, and put yourself, if you really are an athlete that has these high aspirations, go find out what good really looks like. I mean, I think a lot of parents don't know what good looks like, and a lot of athletes don't, so they get this misconception that, oh, my kid's really good. Or the athlete goes, well, I can coast because look how good I am in my little pond. But they never get out there into the world and go, oh, never mind. That's what keep telling everyone I want to be, and I'm nowhere near it yet. Or, wow, you know what? I haven't had the resources of that person, but I'm pretty close. What if I get the resources? And so I think this is such an important message for parents and for athletes is if you really have high aspirations, then figure out a way to get in front of someone who is at the top of your sport and find out what that really looks like.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yep.
Yeah. So do you think you have a blog which I on your Be Brave blog, um, which I read and I liked and was worth exploring in the context of your own career. Um, this idea of is competitive mindset. Are you born with it or can you train it? And so were you born with it or is this something you developed or is it a combination of both?
I That's such a fantastic question. I 100% believe you could train it. That I do think that's one of my more recent articles. It's not totally fresh in my mind, but even independent of that, and hopefully my writing supports this. Um, I I don't know. I haven't really reflected on whether I have a competitive nature. I guess in some sense I do. It would be hard to argue that I don't. However, what I think is important to dive into and what I believe I dove into in the article was it is something you can train, right? Back to that like trainer versus racer. I never inherently felt like I was a racer. And that was something too I learned back to putting like those people who were performing at a higher level in front of me. I was able to see, you know, this one instance comes to mind where so when you're head racing, you're sent down the race course one at a time. Generally, you at least in training, you're sent down like slowest to fastest, right? It's different in racing.
Hmm.
And then clearly, like you want to one post your best time, but then two, you don't want people passing you on the race course.
Hmm.
So Schuylkill River, you have this windy river. There's a couple of key turns you have to make. I very clearly remember my boat out in front of somebody who was 5 years my senior, performing better than me. She took the most aggressive line I'd ever seen. And in saying that, it's like, well, obviously you want to, you know, shortest point, like A to B, that's going to give you your fastest time. But it was like, man, it wasn't natural for me to just be like, you know, get my bow across first. And again, I talk about it and I'm like, that sounds so silly. I'm racing, right?
Hmm.
But these are skills. It's skills that I had to learn. And then there's 100% a mindset component too, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm just curious because I've worked with so many athletes in 30 years of coaching, and I meet a lot of parents, and I have two kids, and so I think that there's a spectrum of competitiveness. And I think certainly there's some research that supports that, younger siblings are usually a little more competitive than older ones. They tend to have better chances to do well in sports because they've been scrapping their whole life, right? They're fighting for every piece of cake and every every bit of
Mhm.
leftovers and whatever. And just, always keeping up with the older kids. But there's something innate about that drive and that focus of we were talking before we started recording about the podcast I did with Slater DeBrun, who's a Baltimore Orioles baseball player, and Campbell McCain, who's a national champion swimmer now at University of Texas, and trying to get into the mindset of these two 18-year-olds that I've known for most of their lives of what drove them and there's something inside them that just from day one makes them different. You know, Slater has a twin, nothing like him, right? And it's like, you know, and it's not that one's better than the other, it's just some people are so driven. But then I think, like you said, if there's that competitive flame, then you can train it and you can fan it and you can give that flame skills to learn how to compete harder. And I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, and also, okay, I'm curious for your feedback on this too. So, where, or in the example I gave, right? So we're talking about competitiveness from the perspective of, I want to win, I want to beat this person. Now, that's different than drive, right? And you can be driven for a variety of reasons, right? This, I think, gets into internal drive, right? Or like internal versus external motivation.
Yeah.
I was, I think I have innate focus and discipline in terms of drive.
Yeah.
Um, I think I was very driven to see
Uh-huh.
what I could do as an athlete,
Yeah.
right? And then let me pause there to collect my thoughts. So, to see what I can do, I was driven to see that. And then I also held on to this belief that if I was able to tap into what I believed I could do, that was going to put me on the top,
Yeah. That
right?
makes sense.
Versus, but yeah, it's a little bit different than like I wanted to be at the top. I believe that I had the ability to do it, and I felt driven to maximize that ability, right?
Yeah.
Or like tap into my potential. Does
I
that make
like that.
sense? And
No, it does, and I think it's really important nuance that you go because then there's this like so you and we'll explore the idea of belief in a second because I don't want to just leave that. But before we leave this other topic of this different, right? There is this competitive like there are just people who hate losing so much that they just have this it's just relentless and I get parents I do a lot of parent talks and they just say what do I do about my kid who every time their team loses they're in tears, right? And it's like you don't want to douse that flame, you just want to sort of rechannel it, right? And you want to use it as fuel because I think every athlete, you talk about your own injuries and things like that, they have these moments that researchers might call trauma, and trauma can be the death of a parent or a divorce or bad injuries. And some people, that event and their thoughts and their beliefs around it sends them off the cliff of like, I'm just not good anymore. And then for others, it becomes fuel, right? It becomes fuel. Michael Jordan gets cut from a basketball team, it's fuel, right? And there's something about why does that become fuel for one and sort of the limiting belief or the end for others. And there I believe that there's something innate about some people always choose to look at those things as challenges and others look at them as threats.
yeah, oh,
I don't
sorry, you
know that
froze
I
there
can prove
for a
that
second.
statement. That's just like my n equals one observation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And also, so I wanted, this is taking a small step back. I wanted to comment on the like rechanneling the competitive drive of the child who's, crying if they lose, for example.
Hmm.
Um, Something I thought of because I've heard I've heard on past episodes you talk to this point, and I meant to look it up before I signed on here, and I did not do it. I want to say like the index is called LVI. Are you familiar with that LV index?
Mm-mm.
Um, okay, I see you shaking your head. So I
No.
can't. I'll have to look up the exact name, but the idea is your so we all have our strengths, right? Now the index is a zero is in the middle, and then you have a positive one and a negative one. And in certain circumstances, so that zero sometimes is like the sweet spot, right? And depending on like the circumstance or the scenario, sometimes you want to like really lean into your strengths and maybe that puts you on a positive one. But then sometimes, depending on the scenario, you actually want to like, you know, I don't know what the word is, kind of
Downplay your strength or something.
downplay,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Downplay, exactly, right. And I feel like there's a place for that in this conversation about, like whether you're fanning the flame or rechanneling, a certain characteristic or strength.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the way I might term it is sometimes your strengths can also be your limiters, right? Like something that's your greatest strength, like my desire to just move forward quickly and independently can limit me because I don't see collaboration or I don't take time to plan something. I just go, right? And so something that can be incredibly positive in your life can also be negative. And so I think that's what you're getting at. And I think that's a really good point that competitive drive and desire to win sometimes takes you too far and becomes a negative and has to be tempered with an understanding that that losing is part of the process and that's what you learn from as well.
Yeah, and to kind of like recognize like when it makes sense to, yeah, really like play in and lean in into the strength or the behaviors around it that support it. And then like you said earlier, like when to I can't remember the exact word you used, but kind of like downplay it a little bit or downshift. For me, just to what you're talking about, so I consider discipline one of my superpowers, right? Or
Mhm.
my highest superpower. And same thing, like I can lean into discipline very easily. Now, if I put my athlete hat back on, I raced on the world stage until I was 40.
Yeah.
Okay. I love consistency. I love discipline. Map out a training plan, put it in front of me. I am going to want to do it to a T. And my
Hmm.
discipline is going to help me get there. Now, we both know, right? Like through the work that we do in our experiences, that like you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable as an athlete, if you wake up and you're feeling sick or whatever the circumstances, and you have a hard workout prescribed, maybe the best thing for you that day is to rest or
Hmm.
to do a easy recovery workout. If I was like discipline, I have to like do this because it's on the paper, that's not going to help me.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why I think the one of the most important phrases in coaching is it depends, right? Like it depends, right? And I think in athlete development too, it depends because sometimes that grind, and this is one of, I think, the myths that is perpetuated by, Nike ads and, popular culture around sport that is just if you're not doing the work, someone else is. And so what I see in youth sports is these kids who every day are out there doing something, but they never recover. They never rest. And as a world-class athlete, you would know that you can't go hard every day because you get injured, but then you actually, if you're trying to go hard every day, you can't go hard. So what happens is you coast
Mhm.
along at 70% and you never go 100% and you never go 20 to recover. And the best athletes in the world go 100 and then they recover. And in some sports, I don't know rowing, but like I know marathon runners, in a 6 day training week, right? They get a day off, but maybe only two of those days are really intense and the rest are sort of just mileage. And so I think people lose this in this if you're not working, someone else is getting up earlier than you. You gotta recover sometimes because it's in that recovery that you rebuild the muscle and then you can go hard again the next day.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a mental component to that too, right? Um, to really like empty the tank, you've got to be ready. You can't, I mean, yeah, you've got to be ready. I think people can probably argue like you could like empty it every day, but I think if you're going to have like a longevity in your career that you actually like can't do that.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's
yeah.
like people can say, Kobe Bryant was out there at 4 a.m. I get that. Like he had a relentless work ethic and spent $1 million a year on recovery. Right. LeBron James, I think he says that he spends $1 million a year on massage and stretching and PT and acupuncture and nutrition and all these things that allows him to go harder and have longevity. So you can't just say, well, I'm going because Kobe does it. Yeah, but what's Kobe doing to recover in between sessions? He's doing a lot. You're not doing any of that. You're not sleeping. You're eating crap and you're never recovering, and therefore you can't. So, yeah, I just think it's just a really important part of it. But there's, I think, part of that mindset is if I have a good plan and I know this is a plan that works, then when the plan says today's a down day, I mentally have to be okay with that. I can't be freaking out that I'm recovering today. I have to be like, oh, this is part of the training, just like mindfulness is, just like getting 10 hours of sleep is. Don't you think?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think part of that is just understanding, right, how physiology works, understanding the big picture. And then, I know we talk about all the time about trusting the process, or I've heard you had Betsy
Betsy
Butterick, is
Butterick.
that her
Yeah, yeah.
name? Yeah, she shifted that to embracing the process, right? Just big picture, like this is part of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so when we're working with young athletes, we fight that. Let's go back to this idea of beliefs. In this same article that I read, and I'll just kind of you talked about this um idea of first identifying your superpowers or your strength. Like you said, yours was discipline. And then you also talked about identifying like limiting beliefs. And so we all have limiting beliefs. And so it's not really the events that happen, it's our beliefs around them that have the effect on our trajectory or lack thereof. So talk about this idea of limiting beliefs and some of the ways that we can overcome them.
Yeah, some of the ways we could overcome them. So I think like the tricky part is like sometimes we have these beliefs that we don't even realize are limiting, right?
Hmm.
So like step one is like bringing awareness to the beliefs. Now, if you're working on that by yourself, I mean, potentially like journaling through experiences, challenging your own thoughts. But really where I want to go, and I think this speaks to what I briefly touched on earlier about like the importance of having that inner circle of people you can trust. So whether it's your athletic coach, I was working with a high performance coach at the time who really brought to light something that was limiting me. And that ties into that trainer versus racer, just having somebody bring attention to that limiting belief and then starting to like walk it back, right? So for me, I was in conversation with my high performance coach. It was a Zoom call just like this, and in conversation I said something about not being a racer, and she interrupted me. We had a good relationship at the time. So with like the love and playfulness in the world, she's like, hold on, right? She's like, what do you mean you're not a racer? And then we started putting the pieces together that was something I was holding on to. And I had to, shift that belief. Like, and now I don't see myself that way at all. But I didn't even know that was something that was holding me back, right? Until she was just like, wait a second.
Well, it's funny because you said
So,
that before too, right? I was a trainer, not a
mhm,
racer, right? Like,
mhm.
and so you're aware of that. But yeah, I mean, the problem is that most of these most damaging limiting beliefs have just become part of our personal narrative that is maybe not aligned with the truth, right? And so
Yeah.
it's so important to look at them and not just like the limiting belief I have today, because a lot of them start when we're really young, right? So it's going back into our childhood, into our adolescent years, into our high school years, into our college years, and identifying like, well, what's a limiting belief from that time in my life? And is it true? And really like, can you say for 100% certain, Cara, that you're not a racer, right? And you couldn't, right?
Hmm.
But yet you said that to yourself over and over for how many years? And then as soon as you let it go, what happened to your performance?
Yeah. Oh, well, I actually can't pinpoint when we kind of dissected that. But I will say my work as a whole so Samantha was my high performance coach. And again, this was a big part of it. My work with her 100% tied into. So I hit what on paper was the height of my career in 2019, right? I won world championship gold with my pair partner.
Mhm.
And it was a direct result, I believe, of the work that we did together, like all of that internal work.
Yeah.
So, and that was part of it. Yeah.
And I just like this is the thing that people have to understand. And I think there's still something, it's gotten better, but in sports psychology, mental training, whatever it is, that's the person you go to when you're sick or when there's something wrong. Right. And it's like, no, that's the optimize. If you ever said to an athlete, go meet the strength and conditioning coach so you can run faster or jump higher, no one would be like, why? Is there something wrong with me? They'd be like, sweet, I want to get better at that. Well, go work with a sports psychologist so that you can run faster and jump higher. And there's
Hmm.
still a little bit like, I don't know that I want to do that. Right. And I work with Division I college teams. Sorry, I'll let you go in a sec. Division I college teams where the vast majority of athletes still won't go take advantage of the free sports psychologist. It's free. It's there for you. And you're leaving it on the table.
Yeah, 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 yes, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of exactly what you said. And I also think like a little bit of this, like, oh, like the mental performance work or the work with a sports psychologist. It's extra, it's added.
Mhm.
It's like the bonus stuff that we could toss to the side if, or we'll invite in if there's like time and resources. Like, no, it's actually fundamental. If we're talking about wanting to get the best out of ourselves as athletes, like you need to do that you need to do that work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I just think, I think coaches could do better at encouraging it. And again, not in the middle of the season when something's going wrong, but in preseason, in the off season. This is part of your individual development plan, is that you're
Hmm.
also going to work with this person on developing these skills, be they leadership, be they self-talk, be they whatever it is. This is part of your individual development plan. You can't leave that on the table and show up next season and be like, I'm ready, coach. No, you're not, because that same thing that you weren't good at last year, you're still not good at. And um, again, if you were struggling with your fitness and you showed up unfit, well, no, you didn't work on that either. But that's something we can see. But the mind chatter and things like that, we can't necessarily see. And so it's a really important thing. I think we just have to take the stigma away. So, I mean, I'm not saying pinpoint the moment, but certainly you can look at letting go of that limiting belief. I'm not a racer. It's somewhere along the path to becoming a world champion.
100%. And even like when you were just repeating it back to me now, like it gave me this like sense of like openness and freedom, right? Because what the shift was for me was like from I am not a racer to oh, I am a racer, right? And that gave me this sense of and like I could feel it now, like this sense of excitement to get to the line versus this sense of dread. It's as simple as that. Like I feel like I don't even really need to elaborate because like it's like one thing or the other. You're not going to get the best out of yourself if you're going in the line with this sense of dread because you feel like, oh, hey, I can crush training any day of the week, but racing is different.
And this is
Yeah.
something where a lot of parents of young athletes, again, this would be an FAQ in the talks that I do, to say, my kid loves practice, but every time the game rolls around, they freeze up or the race rolls around, right? They
Mhm.
just never perform as well. What is your advice on that front?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to answer your question, but I said those same words, right? Like that's actually like I think that's actually what got me in the door and reaching out to Samantha initially was I had this feeling of just like feeling stuck. Like I was doing exactly what you said, performing in practice and then not performing or like, underperforming in racing. So in terms of advice and I'm curious like I'm going to be curious about your response to this. So some of the work I do now with athletes, but even with professionals, right? So I find this, I don't work with youth. I work with, 15 is the youngest
Mhm.
athlete I'm working with at the moment. And then I just recently built out a program for a high school team. So what I consider foundational to some of this work is three parts. Like number one, work with core values, right?
Mhm.
Understanding, like identifying and then also naming for yourself what those values need.
Mhm.
Two, work with character strengths. And then oh my goodness, where am I going with number three? Strengths, values. Um, I just lost my train of thought.
It's
Okay, well, it'll come back. But my point being, or the point I want to make is, I think that we get very fixated on when we talk about goal setting. Like every kid is going to be like, I want to best time, best time, best time, or the win, the win, the win, right? And I try to work to help athletes, help kids expand their thinking, right? When we're talking about goals and pull in these other ideas, like pull in the values, pull in the character strengths, pull in other facets so we could just start to like expand out from like the outcome, because I think once we get that base and foundation, that's going to free us up to not freeze in competition.
well, also because if you're focused only on the outcome, so many things outside of you influence the outcome, right? Your opponent, right? You could row your best race and someone could still beat you because they're just better, right? And so you haven't failed. Like you could still have improved and gotten better. But if you're like, oh, I'm still not on the top of the podium, you know, so focusing on outcomes can be incredibly limiting, and then turn your mindset to this fixed of like, oh, I don't win, so I'm not good, versus I'm didn't win yet, but I'm getting better every week, right? So this process focused and focusing on all the controllables, so identifying what you control before you step onto the line in that race, right? My sleep, my eating, my training, my uh, warm up, whatever it is for your sport, I control all those things, and that has 100% of my attention. My opponent, yes, of course, we prepare for an opponent and we have strategy and whatever, but I can't control the weather, can't control officials, I can't control what my opponent does. And if I am focused on all of those things, I'll never feel confident. Whereas
Mhm.
confident comes from I have maximized everything in my control to perform my best today. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then also, and I think this ties in, like how it was always important to me. And another thing I coached too today, like how do you want to feel at the end of the race, right? Or how do you want to
Mm.
feel at the end of the competition? Tap into that feeling. So for me, and this always helped me get like the best out of myself. There was something around like feeling proud of myself at the end. And there was also something around like doing my best. And I think what the tie was I knew I would feel proud of myself regardless of the outcome if I could cross that finish line and know that I gave my best effort, right? Like
Hmm.
I know that that was my best. And that too just like opened up space to just go, right?
Hmm.
Because otherwise, right, if again, back to what you were saying about focusing on the outcome, it's also whether athletes realize it or not, it is constricting. Like I think, and maybe there's science to related to this that I actually don't know, but you play safer, right? Or like if I was doing an erg test, for example, right, which is the equivalent of a treadmill for
Hmm.
running. Um, I feel like you are naturally going to work up to what you know you could do versus like, let's just see if I could push it a little bit more at the expense of potentially, you know, blowing up and like failing. But
Hmm.
I really want to test myself and see.
Yeah, there is some science around that it's the mind that shuts us down before the body, right? So when we bonk, it's a mental thing before it's a physical thing. And I know that there is some research, I think it's on bike racers, where
Mm-hmm.
they put them, on a not a real bike, but then they have a screen of other riders, and what they found is like they'll ride up to like 2 or 3% faster than they've ever done before. But if you do more than 3%, they fall off the pace. But they can actually do 3% more than they ever thought they could do. And so they're just keeping up with this, and like they'll manipulate the time. And so they think, oh, I'm just doing what I am. And they go, actually, no, we faked the time on that. You just rode 3% better than you ever did before. So there is some research on that, but there's a certain cap to it. You can't make someone 15% faster tomorrow just by that limiting, with a maximally trained athlete. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, and when you're talking about like that level, right, that world class level, like you don't need 15%. You just need
One.
you need to get your bow ball across first, right? That little
Yeah,
teeny bit. Yeah.
yeah. Um, at the same token, I think at that level and focusing on outcomes is you get really tied up in other people's opinions. So what I say to athletes a lot is, um, when you go play in this NCAA tournament game, this Final Four match, like, you know, don't, try to channel the little girl who first picked up a lacrosse stick, right? The boy who fell in love with soccer. What did you feel then? So I think there's this feeling of what do I want to feel like at the end? But if I can also attach to just the person who loves sport and remembers the joy and the freedom it gave me running down a field, that helps you let go of what are people going to say about me if I lose? Because that can be an incredibly limiting belief right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Say, or even just like knowing eyes are on you too. Like that held me back for a long time, you
Hmm.
know? That's another thing like Samantha and I used to talk about was just like permission to be seen, right? Like it's okay. That's not gonna probably resonate with everybody, but I think both kind of go hand in hand, both are related. So
Yeah. Well, talking rowing, go back to Catherine Granger years ago. So I think she did 5 Olympics, and she said her first Olympics, they had no expectations, right? And they finished second. And she's like, a silver medal. It was like the greatest moment of my life. She's like, 4 years later, we were world champions. We expected to win. We finished second. It was the worst moment of my life. So the same exact outcome was a complete opposite ends of the spectrum because of all the beliefs going into that moment. And so yeah, it's just a funny thing, right? How our mind is so powerful, and it's like a muscle. We got to give it reps. We got to work it, or we're leaving something on the table.
yeah, oh, that's wild. I'm gonna have to go fish around for that episode
It's a
now.
long
I'm
time ago. It was
really,
years and years
yeah.
ago. But yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of the greats,
Yeah.
in the sport for sure. So that's going to be fun to listen to. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'll try to find it for you. Um, I mean, t talk about your work today. Who are you working with? You're working with some individual athletes, in rowing or outside of rowing as well.
Yeah, I have a combination. I work with athletes and also executives and young professionals. So definitely outside of rowing, I have one BMX bike racer at the moment, which has been super fun to work with. I've worked with an Olympic weightlifter in the past, so it's a little bit of a variety. I traditionally have been doing one-to-one work, so a lot in a setting just like this, where we meet on Zoom. Within the past year and a half, I've started to dip a toe into the water working with teams. I had the opportunity to work with Lehigh's women's crew team a couple of years ago, some in-person workshops. So I'm potentially looking to build out that side of, both my skill set and my offerings. And then the other thing I'll mention, so this past spring, I launched an athlete mentoring program, and this is something I'm passionate about, slash on the, just about to say something I'm proud of. I feel like it's still kind of evolving and growing. But right now I have a group of 6 athletes who, let's see, they're world class athletes slash have been in the national team pipeline. And they are paired with junior athletes and collegiate student
Mm-hmm.
athletes. So
Mm-hmm.
that too, I initially modeled with this one-to-one relationship in mind. However, we all are too expanding into working with teams, whereas athlete mentor, somebody on my team would work with a small group of high school kids. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Which is so important too, because again, that puts that athlete in your windshield and you
Hmm.
hear their stories. I think we live in this world where it's so easy to be like, well, it just came so easy for Cara. She's a world champion, right? And they never see all the tough moments, right? So we see on YouTube the highlight, but we never see backstage. We never see what happened when the lights weren't on and all the grind and the early mornings and the late nights and the tears and the injuries and the rehabs and all that. And so I think it's really important to attach senior athletes to up and coming ones to talk about, yeah, you lost. So what'd you learn today? Versus like you lost, this is a disaster. Maybe you should do something else.
Yeah. And like back to what we were talking about earlier with like the values and the strengths and expanding our minds from like that single way of goal setting. Like if I think back, or I don't even know if I still have them, but I had journals of like goals when I was a swimmer. And I can guarantee you every single thing was centered around like, getting this time in the 200 IM and this time in the 50 free, right? And there's so much more to athletics and sports and competition than that. So like having these mentors. So the work I've done with them, I've trained them up on a lot of these concepts and principles so they can bring them to the high school kids that they're working with. And then two, like to your point, seeing is believing, like helping them see what's possible for them, helping them like identify the path and the steps to get there. So I'm really excited about it. There's like so much potential to do so many great things. And yeah, so
And I think it's important. And I think it's another thing it's important for parents to understand that the psychological characteristics of someone who is pursuing athletics at the highest level, there is selfishness, there is ruthlessness, there is things that maybe don't play well in the real world, right? And you can get swallowed up by that, right? So I would ask maybe for you personally, and then also for people you've worked with, was rowing is who I am, or was rowing always something that you did, but it wasn't who you were? Because I think that fine line, when it works out, we celebrate you, and when it doesn't work out, you disappear, and that's when people fall off into depression and drugs and whatever other, maladaptive behaviors that come from having your identity tied up in something outside of your control.
yeah, so that's such an important question. I I actually don't think that I ever, I'm trying to think if there was a time in my early 20s. I think I sidestepped the rowing is who I am. And I'll tell you why. And I think this a little bit ties into or is a little bit the result of having like on paper success at a later age, right? I mentioned like my first national team, I was 34 years old when I made my
Hmm.
first team. So I don't know if I would have had the benefit of like this perspective earlier on, right? If I made my first team when I was 20, let's say.
Hmm.
Um, there was a moment that I remember, and I'm going to say it was around, because I was rowing for Undine Barge Club, which was the first club I rowed for on Boathouse Row in Philadelphia. So we're talking 2006, 7, 8-ish. And the club used to host these monthly dinners, which were so much fun. I loved them because there was tradition and ritual baked in. And um, there was one month I remember sitting there, and a couple of my teammates had made the team to go compete at Pan Am's, right?
Hmm.
So that's a in rowing at least that's a step down from competing on the world championship level, or at least like that's how it was viewed when I was racing.
Hmm.
But you're still racing for Team USA. You're still part of the
Hmm.
national team. And I remember like sitting at this dinner, and one of the women, one of my teammates, walked in, and she was just on the heels of qualifying for her first US team, going to race at Pan Am's. And I just have this very clear memory, this realization in that moment of like, man, like she's the exact same person as she was last week or yesterday or whatever it was, right? And it was one of those moments where it just like hit me so hard and it stuck with me, right? I'm talking about it today.
Yeah.
Um, and I think having that little like mini epiphany or realization in that moment kind of helped me like I don't know, saved me is the right way to think of it. But like I never shifted into back to your question that like, oh, rowing is who I am type of
Mhm.
mentality, you know?
Yeah. Still
Um,
put your shoes on one at a time.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Like, what do you
Well,
how's
I
that
mean,
landing with you?
I don't know because I think everyone runs their own race, right? So it's not like we shouldn't compare our child to even their sibling, never mind someone else, because we don't know what their journey is and what's behind it. Didn't really ask about your parents, but maybe it's a good time to like, how were they supportive of your journey? And again, they sent you to this great university and now you're working, but you're also still training. And it's a long time to train to make a national team in rowing. I mean, I don't think anyone here is on the impression that that was then an eight-figure contract to be a, a national team rower, right? So it's like you fund all this and you do all this, eh, you know, but I imagine your parents were supportive, but also their love of you wasn't tied to whether you made the national team or not.
Yeah, no, of course not. I think they were happy for me, right? Well, I would hope they would be.
Yeah, yeah.
They definitely were happy for me, right? When they were, I think they were invested to the extent that they knew it was something that was bringing me joy, right? And I say that because I don't think I noticed and appreciated this at the time, but in looking back, in reflecting, like it always stood out to me that of course, like in college, so my dad is actually a Lehigh grad as well. So it was a huge source of pride that like myself and my sister were also, going there. So
Hmm.
that was a little bit of a no-brainer that they would be at my races, like wearing the Lehigh gear. But then post collegiately, you know, I competed for Vesper Boat Club a couple of years. There's dad with the Vesper Boat Club shirt on. I raced for I'm trying to think, Penn AC was the next boathouse I went to. Like, and then you see like the Penn AC shirt and hat. Like they didn't know one from the other or what one club meant or what the trajectory was. Like they were just there, like
Hmm.
supportive, wanting to like get involved to the extent that they could and that it was helpful. Like they came I raced quite a bit up in Canada before I made the national team. And they came quite a few years. My husband too, of course. I can't not
Hmm.
mention him because he was always there with him.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question,
No,
but I
it
didn't go
does.
back into yeah.
I mean, I think kids end up with identity issues around sport, that this is who I am, not what I do, if they feel that their parents' love of them is tied to their sport performance, right? Or they're more likely to do that. Whereas if they know that they're loved unconditionally and their parents are supportive, but yet not so they're not the baseball parent going, we struck out 10 batters or we scored three goals, right? No, we didn't. Jimmy did, right? And so I think when the parents are not living vicariously through their kids, um, or making their kids feel like the only way you make me proud is if you win, then they're more likely to not have that identity issue. But they're also, it's close. Again, it's the same psychological characteristics that can lead to elite performance, also can have a negative. To go back to the first thing, your greatest strengths can become your greatest limiters. So,
Hmm.
it's not an easy thing, but I do think from a parenting perspective, it's your kid's journey, it's their childhood, it's their dream, and you say, how can I support you best? Um, but again, I don't think any parent doesn't love their kid because they lost, but I think some parents unintentionally make their kids feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I just got lucky or what was in the universe at the time, but I never felt any of that as a kid growing up. I felt like um work ethic was very important in my family, right? I have Polish roots. So some of that I think was more instilled in me, but it wasn't tied to sports, for example, right? It was just like, we go to school, we work hard in school. If I'm going to swim, like you show up, you practice, right? I don't know. There was something else I wanted to comment on, but now it slipped my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's all, it's all really important. And I'm just always fascinated at people like yourself. You're a world champion and your trajectory, again, it took a lot of years of discipline and showing up and keep going to make a first national team at 34, I think is far more impressive than making it at 18. Because at 18, you don't know what you really did to get there. You just kind of got lucky and not lucky, but you know what I mean. Like you were given a certain thing and things fell in place and whatever. But if you're doing it by 34, you've definitely experienced ups and downs and good moments and bad moments and had to develop the resilience and the perseverance to truly just keep your eye on. And every day I'm getting 1% closer and I'm getting 1% closer. And that to me is pretty incredible. And, something that you certainly, I know, share with the athletes you work with and the teams you work with is like, again, hey, I was a 20-year overnight success.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is a little bit of a different thread too, but something that just came up for me is I talk to a lot of, I think, more athletes than professionals about this, but it's common to think, so let's say you do have post-collegiate ambitions, it's common to think that there's like, this is the path, like there's one path forward, or it has to happen by this time. And
Mhm.
that's another thing I try to reinforce, like to the extent I can, is like there is no one path forward, right? And like you said, it was in a different context, but I think you said like everybody's story is their own. So not to get like locked into this mindset or this idea that it has to look this way or it has to happen by this time, and just really be open to possibilities. And if it's something you want, regardless of what the it is, just to keep going for it. Put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. And that when those bad moments, those obstacles happen, that you sort of recollect and reassess, and then how do I move forward from here versus jumping to the conclusion that this is the end. And I think, my own thing, I had a really bad injury when I was 17, but that's when I think soccer became my thing. Like I remember a mindset shift of I'm not going out like this. That's not the end of it for me. I still want to continue this journey and I'm willing to go through a lot to get back on the path. And that's the kind of thing that another person could go, maybe it's not. Maybe that's the end and I'm okay. And I'm okay with that too. And it's not like I'm right and they're wrong. It's just in that moment, I think I was very naturally I want to go out on my terms and not this injury terms. And, you know, that that was me.
Right. And that, like, would you say too that that also brings us back to, values? Like, what did you value? What was driving you? I can totally relate to that because that was important to me too. I very much wanted to go out on my terms, also knowing that it was going to be a gift if I could, because not everybody gets to.
Hmm.
But that I would imagine, like you were driven by and valued something different than the athlete who maybe if they got the same injury at 17 and decided to be like, okay, I'm going to do something different. This isn't for me anymore.
Yeah, and I think that I'll go back to the work ethic instilled in me by my parents and sort of this combination of, my dad being, the Irish Catholic guy from the Bronx who was like, is that your best? Could you do more? Um, could you be more disciplined? Have you really given your best? Have you fulfilled your commitment? That sort of thing. And my mom of unconditional love of if this is your last game, then so be it. I remember she wrote me a letter in my 20s of like she's like I noticed a shift in you at that time. Like you had this huge mental like she's like, you grew up and you said, get out of my way. Don't cuddle me. Don't whatever. I need to do this. And, I treasure that letter.
I got goosebumps. Like I literally have them right now. So yeah, because what did that letter ultimately do for you? I'm curious.
Well, the letter was a couple years after the fact, right? So it
Okay.
wasn't a letter in the moment, but it probably helped me put that moment of my life in perspective of like, oh
Mm.
yeah, like this is an outside person saying you changed in that moment. And I love and so, my mom passed away a year and a half ago. And I found and my dad recently passed away, and going through their house that I grew up in, found all these old letters that she had made some copies of ones she had written to me or whatever. And honestly, what those letters have done for me, the biggest thing they've done for me is made me start writing more letters to my kids. Not texts that disappear into the ether or emails, but a typed letter, because my handwriting's terrible and kids can't read cursive, right? But like typed letters with a note of where they are in their life or whatever, so that they'll stick it in a box and keep it and have it in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, versus a text that just disappeared. So I don't know, that's the biggest effect on it today.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
gonna be, I imagine, just like an incredible gift, later
I hope
on.
so.
So
I hope
yeah,
so. I hope
yeah.
so. Awesome. Cara, how can people connect with you and learn more about your work and read the Be Brave blog and all that?
Yeah, sure. My website is carastawicki.com. So it's Carast. Oh my goodness. I've never just like spelled it out all at one time. So Stawicki is Stawicki. And same thing. I am on Instagram. That's like the best like social media place to find me. So Cara Stawicki on Instagram.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Any final thoughts? Anything that you want to leave our listeners with on your career or how they can support and coach people that are trying to do what you did? And any final thought?
Mm. What's coming up for me is if and I guess this is more to the athletes listening, if there's any little like glimmer of desire to go for a thing, even if there is uncertainty around it, because there's uncertainty around all of it, right? Like, um, I would just encourage people to go for it. Like listen to that like little pull in your heart and keep going. So sometimes it's hard to listen to and honor that. So yeah.
That's that's wonderful advice, and I think most people in life, it's not sins of commission, it's sins of omission, right? You regret the things you didn't do, usually more than the things that you did do. And so I think that's a wonderful final thought. Cara, thanks so much for being on the Way of Champions.
Thank you. It was awesome to connect and talk with you on all these things.
Thank you all for listening. Thanks again. Cara Stawicki, carastawicki.com or at Cara Stawicki, her name on Instagram. All that's in the show notes. Uh, what a cool conversation. And I love how it sort of bounced in and out of her career timeline, but so incredibly impressive. Someone with the drive and the discipline and the mental strength to keep going and keep going, to make your first national team at 34, to become a world champion after that. It's just an incredible story. And I'm so happy that she is out there now helping other athletes and setting up mentorship programs and working with teams, because that type of discipline and longevity in sport is really rare. So thank you, Cara, for being on. Thank you to all of you who have supported our podcast, who leave reviews, who support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/way of champions if you want to become a supporter. Thank you to Sprocket Sports, our main sponsor for the last couple of years. And thank you to all of you. Your influence is never neutral. So go out there this week, take what you learned, and use your influence for good. Make a positive impact. See you again next week, everybody.